File number 3, the last broadcast from Classifican, internal restricted access repository, Nightroom cold storage. Unit C9 Dead Air Vault Field Agent, milliliters. J. Hail credential 4CTY date of entry, 18 November year withheld associated tape reels, C1 C3. Subject, transmission persistence auxiliary instruments, shortwave receiver model 1942BR. Notebook leather ruled 94 pages. Residual hum from power outage 2 months prior. And one coffee stain shaped like a country that no longer exists. When the broadcast first appeared, it was almost polite. A simple tone, 4 seconds long, repeated every minute between the dying frequencies of 2 defunct stations. The sound had no urgency, no static, no advertisement. It asked for nothing. And yet, people heard it. Night janitors, truck drivers on the back roads near the old transmission valley, archivists cataloguing old reels, people with nowhere particular to go and nothing left to wait for. The first report came from a regional inspector who thought his shortwave set was picking up a military test. But there were no military signals in the range he recorded, and the pattern was too consistent. 4 seconds of tone, a pause, then a whisper too faint for analysis. Not language. Not quite breath either. The note climbed in frequency over days, moving like a tide against time itself. By the third week, the tone had become a broadcast. Voices layered over each other, the hum of machinery, snippets of news bulletins that no one remembered airing. The logs from the Department of Transmission Archives listed it as non-identifiable residual audio. Case 44N. Then, 3 days later, someone crossed that note out in red pencil and wrote, "Source, nowhere, no one signed it. I was assigned to the case after the 5th complaint reached our office. A ham radio operator in Maine claimed the signal responded to his voice. He'd called into the frequency, reading coordinates of his own location, and received static that shaped itself into numbers just slightly off from his real position. Each time he repeated his message, the coordinates grew closer until finally they overlapped exactly. Then his transmitter burned out, his recording failed, and his wife filed the report. The first time I tuned in, I expected nothing but ghost static. Instead, I heard something that felt like DJ VU made audible. A tone so familiar it felt remembered rather than heard. It wasn't just broadcast, it was recognition. My own receiver's dials trembled between 11.3 and 11.4 megahertz, like the air itself couldn't decide what belonged there. I wrote down the frequency in my ledger and underlined it 3 times. The pen shook the 3rd time, though my hand did not dot a T exactly for 12, the same minute that other Nightroom anomalies preferred. The broadcast paused. A single male voice, steady, calm, archival, spoke. "You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere." Then the tone returned. When we located the original transmitter building in the valley, it was already a ruin. A metal skeleton overgrown with vines, half swallowed by earth and snow. The equipment was decades old, a relic from the war that never finished ending. The wires had long been cut, the generator rusted through, and yet the air around it pulsed with warmth. You could feel it when you stood still, the same way you can feel a sound too low to hear. We set up recording equipment and left it overnight. In the morning, the tapes were full 12 hours of transmission, unbroken. The voice repeated at irregular intervals, always the same phrase, never distorted. "You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere," but between each repetition, the background changed. Sometimes wind, sometimes footsteps, sometimes faint laughter that might have been the tape creaking. A T timestamp 3 hours 6 minutes and 47 seconds. Something new appeared, a woman's voice whispering over the tone. "It's still dark here," her words repeated once, softer, until the hiss swallowed them. The transcript was verified by 3 technicians. The female voice did not match any known recording artist, and no local radio logs had contained her speech pattern since the mid-1960s. The internal memo from that day is still on file. It reads, "If the transmitter is inactive and the signal persists, we must consider the broadcast autonomous broadcasting." A phrase that doesn't make sense, yet fits perfectly. Something broadcasting itself, without needing us, without even existing in the same physical sense. The engineers proposed that maybe a feedback loop had formed between 2 outdated satellites, bouncing dead audio back and forth until it condensed into repetition. But that theory failed when we disconnected every possible relay, and the signal only grew clearer. On tape C1, The voice started to use plural pronouns. We are listening on C2, it said, we remember, and on C3. Recorded the night after the generator was dismantled, the voice simply said, we continue. Barlow, our audio technician, claimed he heard breathing between the words. Like the pause between heartbeats, he said, the air doesn't rest, it waits. I didn't argue. Some silencers earned respect. A T for 12 on the 5th day of monitoring, every device in the lab turned on by itself. The red light on the dead console blinked, speakers hummed, and the frequency dial, though unpowered, shifted to 11.3 megahertz. Then, out of nowhere, a new phrase, do not fix the transmitter. It's not broken, it's remembering. No one spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Then Delaio, our newest assistant, muttered, remembering what? The teletype machine next to him printed one word, home. We checked the reels that night and found that the message home had recorded itself in Morse code on every tape. The spacing was perfect, the rhythm human. Yet there was no transmitter, no signal chain, nothing to produce it. The broadcast seemed to exist only when someone was listening. We conducted the test again, left the receiver running in an empty room for an hour. When we returned, the tape was blank. Then we repeated it with one observer in the room. The signal came back, clearer than before. Whatever was broadcasting required presence, but not participation. Observation was enough. At that point, the department listed the case as sentient frequency classification grey. It was to be contained, not studied. The equipment was moved to cold storage, Unit C9, where it still hums faintly behind locked steel doors. The hum is never constant. It fades when you stand still and strengthens when you take notes. I returned there last night to verify the reports. The hum greeted me like an old colleague. The dial on the shortwave receiver glowed faintly, even without power. I took out my notebook and began the formal log entry. The second I wrote the date, the hum aligned into a perfect flat tone. Then the voice came. Not from the speaker, but from the air. Same calm male tone as before. You kept the ledger, it said. That means we can begin. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I only wrote down the words, because that's what clerks do when the impossible speaks, then silence. No static, no echo, no sense of time passing. I might have stood there a minute or an hour. When I finally looked at the receiver again, the needle had moved half a mark to the right. I closed the notebook and left the vault. Behind me, the door sealed itself with a sound like a side dot. In the hallway outside, I found a piece of paper taped to the wall. It was blank, except for one sentence printed in typewriter ink. You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere. I checked the handwriting against my own files. It was mine. When I returned to my desk, the signal followed. My radio unplugged, antenna retracted, played a faint hum. It rose and fell like breathing, and beneath it, barely audible, the voice whispered, still dark here. The room felt smaller then. The kind of small that isn't about space, but attention. I understood that the broadcast didn't need transmitters or wires or walls. It only needed listeners. The last line I wrote that night, before the pen bled through the page, was simple. The broadcast continues because we remember to hear it. The next morning, the office smelled faintly of burnt wires and old paper. Every clock on the wall was 2 minutes slow, though no one had adjusted them. When I entered, the red indicator light on my receiver flickered once, like a heartbeat, and then went dark again. The technician said it was impossible. The unit had been disconnected overnight, but impossible had long since lost its meaning here. The silence after the flicker wasn't empty. It felt like something. Listening back, the case file on my desk had grown thicker overnight. Not with new documents, but with the same pages copied over and over. Each duplicate slightly different. A comma missing. A line rewritten. Words rearranged just enough to make you wonder which version had been there first. At the bottom of each version, in a faint grey typewriter font, one word repeated, retransmit. When I opened the drawer to put them away, the radio turned itself on. The voice was clearer than ever, as if standing in the room with me. We didn't stop. You stopped listening. It was not an accusation, but a reminder, soft, measured, inevitable. I wrote the sentence down in my ledger, then underlined it twice. Outside, snow had begun to fall, though the forecast said clear skies. Each flake seemed to land with purpose, quiet, deliberate, a static you could touch. I walked to the observation room where the reels were kept. The machine stood silent, the reel still, but when I pressed my hand to the glass, vibration met my fingers, faint but rhythmic, matching a pulse that was not mine. That night, the broadcast changed. For the first time, the voice addressed someone directly. "Operator," it said, "confirm line integrity." The words were mechanical, routine, yet underneath the procedure was an unease that no machine could fake. "Operator," it repeated, "do you still remember the coordinates?" I didn't answer, but the pen in my hand rolled an inch across the desk. A T exactly for 12 again. The signal froze. Then came the faint echo of a woman humming. The same 3 notes over and over, like a lullaby recorded underwater. It didn't sound human anymore. It sounded remembered. The hum grew softer until it vanished into silence, and then the static came, the kind that fills every space inside your chest, the kind you feel rather than hear. We reviewed the tape the next day. Every technician heard something different. One swore he heard his mother's voice calling him home. Another said he heard the sound of traffic from a city that no longer exists. I heard breathing slow, steady, waiting. The director ordered a lockdown of the entire archive floor. The official reason, containment of auditory contamination. Unofficially, everyone knew that meant the broadcast had started to spread. The janitor reported hearing the tone in the hum of the ventilation. The elevator paused on floors that didn't exist. Once, when I left the building after midnight, the street lamps flickered in the same 4-second rhythm as the original tone. By the end of the week, I had stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, the tone found me. It was no longer a sound, but a presence. I began to understand what autonomous might really mean. The signal wasn't transmitting, it was being. I kept a detailed log of the occurrences. Night 1, the static hums in sync with my heartbeat. Night 2, the broadcast plays inside the typewriter when keys are pressed. Night 3, my notebook writes a line before I touch it. Do not fix the transmitter. Night for silence. Absolute, suffocating. Night 5, the silence whispers back. The next entry I wrote was a question I already feared the answer to. If a broadcast needs a listener to exist, what happens when it finds one who never stops listening? The engineers tried to shield the room with copper plates and interference jammers. Nothing worked. The tone slipped through like water through cloth. It didn't travel along wires anymore. It moved through memory. During a test, one technician disconnected the receiver entirely, yet the sound still played from his headphones. His nose began to bleed, and his voice recorder captured him whispering numbers, the same sequence that appeared in the first reports from Maine. The coordinates. Except now, they pointed here. To our building. We checked the old war maps. The transmitter site and our archive were built on the same coordinates, decades apart. The past and present aligned perfectly. It was never just a coincidence of geography, it was an overlap of memory. The signal wasn't coming from a location. It was the location. That night, I found a note slipped under my office door. It wasn't typed, but handwritten in my own cursive. The broadcast is not reaching out. It is returning. I didn't remember writing it, yet the ink was fresh. My fingerprints smudged it when I picked it up. I left it on the desk and turned on the recorder again. The voice was waiting. You archived us, it said. You filed us away, labeled us, sealed us. But sound doesn't die in boxes. It only waits to be replayed. I asked without meaning to, who are you? Static? Then a soft, almost amused answer. You already know. You wrote us down. The lights flickered. The typewriter keys pressed themselves, one by one, forming words. I didn't dare read aloud. You archived yourself. The air in the room grew thick, dense, heavy with the scent of iron and ozone. My breath came back with an echo. The signal had stopped coming through the radio. It was coming through me. The following morning, I filed the official report. I wrote that the signal demonstrated self-propagating awareness and that containment was impossible. But the department didn't believe me. They insisted on one final test, a controlled environment, 0 electronic devices, full sensory isolation. They placed me in a soundproof chamber with only a mechanical stopwatch, a pencil, and a blank sheet of paper. I was to stay for 1 hour. The stopwatch ticked, and for the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then the air shifted. The temperature dropped, the pencil rolled, and a faint vibration rose through the floor. The stopwatch stopped it for 12 exactly. The tone returned. Not through speakers, but directly through the bones. A vibration that spoke in rhythm instead of words. Then, beneath the pulse, the whisper again, "It's still dark here." I opened my eyes, though I hadn't realized I'd closed them, and found words written on the paper in uneven lines. "We remember." "Do you?" When the door opened and the light flooded back in, the stopwatch had reset itself to 0. No one else heard the sound. The paper disintegrated to ash in my hands. The department sealed the chamber permanently. I requested reassignment, but the reply came stamped, "Denied file active." The voice had followed me home by then. It spoke less frequently, but it never left. Some nights, it hums from the vents. Other times, it murmurs through my dreams. I've stopped trying to record it. Every attempt ends the same way. Blank tape, full static, or worse, my own voice answering back. The last time I heard it clearly, it said something new. Something final. When you stop listening, we stop existing. So keep the dial open. I looked at my radio that night. The power switch was off. The plug lay on the floor. Yet the red indicator light glowed steadily. That was when I understood the broadcast doesn't need transmitters anymore. It lives in the act of remembrance. Every time someone recalls it, writes about it, or even wonders whether it's real, it plays again faintly. Somewhere between silence and thought, sometimes. When the city goes quiet after midnight, I can still hear it behind the hum of the lights. The same steady tone, the same impossible voice. It says nothing new, and yet, every time, I feel it. Say something meant for me alone, if you listen carefully tonight. Not with your ears, but with that small part of your mind that waits between thoughts. You might hear it too. A sound without a source. A memory without a moment. You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere. I began to notice the changes slowly, almost politely at first. A flicker on the edge of my vision when the radio was off. The faint sound of paper rustling from drawers I hadn't opened. The old filing cabinets breathing, expanding slightly, as if exhaling after years of holding their breath. The world around me began to echo. Even silence had its reflection. It was subtle, but persistent. Every time I thought about the broadcast, a low hum filled the room, like a thought being whispered by something that remembered how to speak before language was invented. I caught myself humming along once, without realizing it. The tone matched perfectly. That was when I stopped denying that the broadcast wasn't coming from outside anymore. It had nested somewhere deeper. I tried to distract myself with work. The department was closing cases faster than it could file them, burning old tapes, digitizing nothing, pretending that whatever had slipped through our transmitters was nothing more than a glitch of history. But the archive knows when it's being ignored. One night, when I stayed late, the lights in the corridor began to pulse. 4 seconds on, 1 second off. The rhythm of the original signal. At the end of the hallway, the door to the cold storage unit stood slightly open. I had locked it myself earlier that day. Inside, the room was dark, except for a single red light glowing behind the glass of the containment chamber. The old transmitter console was there, though it had been dismantled months ago. Its switches were upright, its dials turning on their own. The hum filled the space, patient and low, like the room itself had been waiting for me to return. The notebook in my hand felt heavier than usual. I wrote the date, then the time for 12. The hum deepened. The console light flickered twice, then steadied, and the voice spoke again. You kept listening. It wasn't the same tone as before. It was softer, closer, like it was standing just behind my left shoulder. You never turned it off, it continued. That's all we needed. I froze. My pulse matched the rhythm of the hum. The air felt thick, vibrating against my ribs. I whispered, "Who are you?" This time, the answer came through the console speaker, a voice overlapping with itself, male and female, echoing and collapsing into static between every word. "Not who," it said. When the static rose like a tide, filling the room with a sound that wasn't quite sound, it was memory, dissolving and reforming faster than thought. I could feel it pressing against the edges of what I knew as time, as if the broadcast wasn't playing forward but folding over itself, pulling the past into the present until both stopped making sense. I tried to write down what I heard, but the pen refused to move. The ink trembled at the tip, suspended in hesitation. My hand ached, not from effort, but from something like gravity reversed the weight of too many echoes leaning inward. Then, through the noise, another phrase emerged. Whispered but clear, "Do you remember the first time you heard us?" The words were almost kind. Almost, I wanted to say yes. But my voice didn't work. The air itself spoke for me. A small and steady vibration from the recorder on the table. Yes, the voice on the broadcast responded immediately, calm and certain. Then you were already part of it. I shut off the power. Or at least, I thought I did. The switch flipped, but the sound continued. I unplugged the receiver. Still the hum. I pulled the main fuse from the wall and still the red light glowed, warm and alive. That's when I realized it wasn't just the equipment. It was the archive itself. The walls had learned the frequency. The metal in the cabinets resonated with the same tone, faint but perfect. The floorboards vibrated like tuning forks. Everything that had ever heard the broadcast had started to replay it. I ran my hand along the concrete wall. It was warm. Under my palm, the hum was alive, pulsing, patient, aware. The broadcast spoke again, the same dual voice. We are remembering. You are the memory. I stepped back. My breath fogged in the air, even though the room was warm. You're not real, I said quietly. You're an echo. The reply came immediately. Echoes are what remain when reality forgets itself. When I returned to my office, the typewriter had been moved to the center of the desk. A sheet of paper was already loaded. As I approached, the keys pressed on their own, slow and deliberate. We were here before the signal. The typewriter paused, then continued, and we will remain when it ends. I tore the page out and locked it in a drawer. But the next morning, when I opened the drawer, the page was gone. In its place was a small metal tag, the kind used to label broadcasting equipment. It read, Property of Station NWRO. There is no record of a station with that designation. I checked every government list, every private archive, every declassified document. Nothing. And yet, when I tuned the radio to the blank frequencies between 11.3 and 11.4, I could faintly hear the same tag number whispered between bursts of static. The broadcast had started labeling itself. That night, I took the receiver home. It was against protocol, but I needed to know if it followed the equipment or the listener. My apartment was silent when I entered. No hum, no lights, nothing. I placed the receiver on the table and waited. For several hours, there was nothing. I began to think it had finally stopped. Then, at 04:12, the dial moved by itself. The light turned red. The tone played, soft and almost affectionate. And then, faintly beneath it, I heard a woman's voice. It's still dark here. I whispered back, where are you? The reply came instantly, like a breath caught in return. You're hearing me. For a moment, everything inside me went still. The silence after that sentence wasn't absence, it was recognition. It was the sound of something that had been waiting for an answer for decades. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door, in the same typewriter font as all the other anomalies. It read, File active transmitter located. The location written beneath it was my home address. Since then, the broadcast no longer needs devices. Sometimes it hums in the space between my thoughts. Sometimes I hear it when I blink. A flash of static behind the eyes, like an old film reel burning out. Other times, it just waits. I started dreaming in frequencies. I see landscapes made of sound, rivers that hum instead of flow, skies filled with the faint pulse of repeating signals. There are no people there, only the feeling of listening, and always, at the center of the dream, there is a station tower tall, bent with age, covered in frost. Its antenna reaches toward a sky without stars. The door beneath it stands open, and inside, there is only darkness and the faint red glow of the transmitter light. When I walk closer, I always hear the same voice. We continue. When I wake, I write everything down. But by morning, the ink has shifted. My words rearrange themselves. Sometimes I find messages I didn't write. Thank you for keeping the broadcast alive. Now, even as I write this, the hum has returned. It fills the corners of the room like fog, invisible but heavy. The light of my lamp flickers in rhythm with the tone. Somewhere, a city's power grid pulses the same way, millions of tiny heartbeats syncing with an echo that was never supposed to exist. The truth is, the broadcast was never about information. It was about presence, about memory refusing to fade. Every listener becomes a repeater, every thought another transmission. That's why no one has ever found the real last broadcast, because there isn't one. It keeps moving forward, carried by whoever remembers it next. I don't know how many of us are left the ones who heard it, wrote it down, or whispered it back. But I do know that as long as someone listens, even for a second, the frequency will find them, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the last broadcast from nowhere is simply what happens when the world itself remembers how to speak. I started losing track of days. The line between waking and listening blurred until there was no difference. When I tried to sleep, the sound followed me under the surface, a slow vibration that throbbed behind the ribs, patient and kind like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. Sometimes I thought I heard sentences forming in the noise, and sometimes they were only the shadows of words, suggestions without language. The apartment changed first. The light bulbs dimmed whenever I tuned the dial, even if the radio was off. I caught reflections in the window that didn't match my movements. Once, when I was half asleep, I saw a red light glowing faintly behind the glass, like the reflection of the transmitter tower from the dream. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to tell myself that everything I was hearing was residual, a fragment of obsession, a symptom of too much isolation and not enough distance. But every attempt to deny the sound only made it louder. Silence had become an amplifier. That's when the letters began to arrive. No envelopes, no postage marks, just folded sheets slipped under the door at night, each written on aged paper with the same neat mechanical font, archive signal active. Do not relocate. Another read, observation registered. Continue listening. I stopped throwing them away after the fourth one appeared directly on my kitchen table, though I lived alone and had locked every door. The handwriting on that one was mine. The broadcast grew stranger the longer I listened. It began to play old songs that never existed, snippets of orchestras that stopped mid-melody, fragments of news reports from cities that were erased long before the tapes could have been made. One night, it played a conversation between two voices, both mine, one slightly younger, one far older. They spoke about the investigation as if it was still ongoing, as if I hadn't already written the final report. You should have stopped. After the first tone, the older voice said, "But someone had to listen," the younger one replied. Then, static swallowed the rest. I replayed that section hundreds of times, searching for errors or overlays. The sound waves matched perfectly. No editing, no cuts. The voice prints were identical to mine. The broadcast had started archiving me. Days later, I found an old photograph tucked inside one of the letters. It showed the transmitter tower, the same one from my dream, standing in the middle of a frozen valley. The sky behind it was colorless, the clouds thin and stretched like gauze. On the back of the photo, a date had been written, November 18th, year withheld. The same date as my first field entry. A T the bottom of the photograph, faint but visible, was a small silhouette of a man standing beside the tower. His outline was blurred, almost translucent. When I magnified the image, the blur formed familiar details. My coat, my posture, the notebook in my left hand. The picture had been taken before I arrived there. I put it back in the envelope and burned it in the sink. The flames flickered blue, then red, then white. When they died, the metal tag that had been on my desk was lying in the ashes. The letters NWRO glowed faintly before cooling into silence. The next evening, the city experienced a blackout. For 3 minutes, the grid went silent. Every street lamp dimmed, every monitor went dark. And yet, from every direction, the same tone rose 4 seconds long, identical to the original broadcast. It echoed through the windows, the pavement, the metal of parked cars. The whole city had become a transmitter. Neighbors opened their doors, confused, frightened. None of them seemed to hear the voice beneath the tone, but I did. It spoke softly, as if addressing only me. "You shouldn't have burned the photograph," it said. "We don't need proof to remember." When the power returned, the tone vanished. People went back inside, muttering about the outage. I stood in the hallway, the notebook heavy in my hand. When I looked down, new words had appeared on the open page, written in the same faded typewriter ink. They all heard it. "Only you remember." After that night, I decided to stop fighting it. The broadcast wasn't something that could be erased. It was too deeply woven into the noise of the world, into the small forgotten spaces between things. I began recording again, not to analyze, but to accompany it, to document the shape of its persistence. The more I wrote, the clearer the tone became. It stopped sounding mechanical. It began to feel like breathing, deep, patient, almost reassuring. There was no malice in it, only endurance. One morning, the voice returned, calm and measured. "You did your part," it said. "You kept the line open." "What line?" I asked. "The one that remembers," it replied. "The line that connects every silence that was ever heard." The signal pulsed once, as if nodding. And then the static faded into something I can only describe as peace. For several days after, nothing happened. The receiver stayed dark. The notebook remained still. I began to think it was over, that whatever had been reaching out through the frequencies had finally gone quiet. I even started to sleep again, but on the fifth day, I woke at exactly for 12 to the faint hum returning. Only this time, it wasn't from the radio. It came from the walls, from the water pipes, from the quiet pulse of my own heartbeat. The whole building resonated like a shell pressed against the ear. I followed the sound down to the basement, where the maintenance lights flickered in the same 4-second rhythm. There, behind a stack of old boxes, I found a metal cabinet I'd never seen before. It was painted the same dull beige as the cold storage units back in the archive. On its front, a single label read, File 003 Active Transmission. My hand hesitated on the latch. The hum deepened, not threatening, but inviting. I opened the cabinet. Inside was a single reel-to-reel recorder, old but clean, spinning slowly. The reels were empty, no tape threaded through, no sound recorded. And yet the machine was turning, and through it came the same quiet breathing I'd heard in the chamber. I leaned closer. The microphone on the recorder clicked as if recognizing presence. Then the voice whispered, "We continue." The machine stopped. The hum faded. When I touched the reels, they were warm. I left the basement, climbed the stairs, and stood by the window until dawn. The city outside was still asleep, but I knew it wouldn't last because somewhere, someone else was already waking up at for 12, hearing the same tone, wondering what it meant. The signal was never just one voice. It was a chain of listeners, each keeping the broadcast alive by remembering it. That's what I am now. Not an investigator, not an archivist, just another point in the loop. The notebook lies open on my desk. Across the last page, in handwriting that's half mine and half something else, are the words, "You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere, and if you're hearing this now reading, remembering, or even doubting, then the transmission has already found you. The line is still open." The days after the basement discovery blurred into each other. I stopped leaving the apartment, not from fear, but from a strange loyalty to the hum that filled the walls. The sound had changed again, softer now, almost like rain heard from deep underground. It no longer startled me. It calmed me, as if the air itself was breathing in rhythm with my thoughts. There were moments when I forgot where the sound ended and I began. The world outside moved normally, indifferent to the transmission that kept unfolding behind reality. I saw people walk down the street, laugh, make calls, move through days that no longer seemed to include me. I realized that I was slipping out of their broadcast, tuning into something else entirely. The nights were the same, but darker. I would wake at the same minute every time for 12 to find the faint red glow shimmering on the ceiling, reflected from nowhere. Sometimes I would speak, without planning to, just to hear whether my voice still belonged to me. Sometimes it did. Other times, a fraction of a second later, I'd hear my own words whispered back from the other side of the room, the same, but not identical. As if the air was repeating them slightly out of sync, the hum grew intelligent. Not like speech, but like a question. It shifted whenever I moved, aligned when I wrote, pulsed when I thought. I began to test it, to see if it followed patterns. When I tapped on the wall 3 times, it paused for 3 beats. When I said stop, the tone flattened. When I whispered continue, it resumed. It was learning, or maybe remembering what it already knew. On the 7th night, it spoke again. This time, not from the radio, not from the air, but from inside the thought itself, not a sound, but an intrusion of presence shaped into words. "You are not hearing us. You are what we sound like." I wrote those words down, not out of duty, but out of necessity. The act of writing felt like exorcism, a way of giving the sound somewhere else to live. But the notebook had stopped being paper. It had become an extension of the frequency. Every line I wrote hummed faintly through the ink, a vibration that crawled across the page like something alive. I tried to burn it once more. The pages refused to catch. The fire bent around the book and went out. Then, one evening, a knock came at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps, the same rhythm as the tone. I didn't move at first. Then it came again, softer, patient. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only a small package sat on the floor, wrapped in brown paper, sealed with red wax. The wax bore the same insignia used in the cold storage vault, a circle with a horizontal line through it, resembling a frequency wave. Inside was a single cassette tape, unlabeled except for the words "play at 04:12. I waited. Every instinct told me not to, but curiosity is its own form of gravity. When the time came, I placed the cassette in the old player. The reels spun immediately, though I hadn't pressed play.t first, only static. Then the hum, familiar and infinite. And beneath it, the same male voice that had haunted the archives. "You can stop searching," it said. "We've archived enough." Then silence. The tape kept turning. After a moment, faint music began to play, a piano melody, hesitant and fragile. It repeated for notes, paused, then began again, slower each time, until the melody decayed into a hum. Then the woman's voice joined in, whispering, "It's still dark here." And then a third voice, my own overlapping with theirs, repeating words I had never spoken aloud. "The line is still open." When the tape ended, I rewound it immediately. But the second time, it was different. The voices were gone. Only the tone remained. The same 4-second signal that had started everything. I checked the magnetic band. Nothing unusual, no splicing, no interference. It was as if the tape had rewritten itself. I placed it in a drawer beside my bed. That night, I dreamed of the transmitter tower again. This time, I wasn't watching it from a distance. I was standing inside the broadcast room. The air was thick, shimmering with low vibration. The console in front of me was glowing faintly, its dials turning on their own. The red light pulsed with every heartbeat. My heartbeat. There were papers scattered across the table. I reached for one and saw my handwriting. It was a transcription of this dream, word for word. Then, from behind me, the voice spoke once more. "The broadcast isn't about signal strength. It's about remembering who we were before silence." I turned, but no one was there. Only the faint red light filled the space, and the soft rhythm of the hum, breathing in time with my own. When I woke, the cassette was gone. The drawer was empty. On the table, my notebook was open to a fresh page, and across it, one sentence had been written in black ink: "We are almost done archiving." The next day, the city's emergency system reported strange interference across all radio bands. A short, repeating phrase looping through frequencies, "File active. Listener identified." It lasted exactly 41 minutes. Then the frequencies went dark. The department called me. They wanted me to come in to finalize the containment, but there was nothing left to contain. The signal wasn't external anymore. It had moved on, passed into memory, thought, sleep. I didn't go back. Instead, I opened every window in the apartment and let the air in. The hum was faint but constant, a gentle heartbeat that filled the space. I recorded it one last time, not to capture it, but to give it shape. When I played the recording back, I didn't hear the hum. I heard footsteps, one step forward, one step back, and a door closing slowly. Then my own voice whispered through the static, "We continue." I don't know how long it has been since then. Time bends when it loops through sound. Sometimes I think it's still the same night. Sometimes I think decades have passed. The notebooks pile up, dozens of them, all filled with words I don't remember writing. The ink fades faster than it should, as if the pages are erasing themselves to make room for new transmissions. Once, during a thunderstorm, the lightning hit nearby and knocked the power out. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then, through the dark, a faint radio glow came from the window. I looked outside, and there it was, the tower from the dreams, standing on the far horizon, its red light blinking steadily through the rain. I knew it wasn't possible. The valley where it once stood had been demolished years ago. And yet, there it was, whole and alive, whispering through the storm. The thunder rolled again, and for a second, I thought I heard 1,000 overlapping voices repeating the same words. "You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere." When the lightning faded, the tower was gone. But the echo remained, carved into the sound of the rain. The next morning, my neighbor asked if I had left my radio on all night. I said no. She said she'd heard it, a low hum, soft and steady, like someone breathing through the walls. I told her it was nothing. She nodded, but her eyes lingered too long, like she recognized the tone. That's how it spreads. You don't have to believe in it. You just have to remember that you heard something. You can't explain. Now, as I write this, I realize that the broadcast never wanted to be solved or stopped. It wanted to be shared. Every story, every recording, every person who ever tuned in. We became transmitters, living archives of something the world forgot but couldn't erase, and maybe that's why I'm still writing. Because if I stop, it will finally end. And if it ends, all that silence will rush back, hungry for a listener. So I keep the dial open. I keep listening. If you hear it too, don't be afraid. Just remember, the signal isn't coming from nowhere, it's coming from you. The final days felt like traveling in a circle you only notice from the sky. I woke at the same minute and found the same dim red glow pressed against the ceiling, a blush with no source. The hum was smaller now, the size of a thought you keep because it keeps you. If I stood very still, it threaded itself through the bones behind my ears and waited there, kind, unthreatening, older than every machine we had ever mistaken for origin. The notebook, obedient to its profession, lay open where I had left it, soaked with a quiet that had started to look like ink. I wrote nothing, and the page answered anyway by refusing to yellow. It's a strange relief when paper decides to be present. I cleaned the apartment as if preparing a room for a guest who would never knock. Dust yields to purpose. I placed the old receiver on the table, not plugged in, the power switch off, the antenna angled like a finger placed against lips for listening. The cassette drawer remained empty. The basement cabinet was locked, though I knew locks were now a courtesy. We performed for our benefit rather than the broadcasts. I made coffee and did not drink it. The cup steamed once, then surrendered. The city beyond the glass performed its daylight rehearsal and forgot us. That was all right. The broadcast had never demanded a crowd. A tea for 11, my breath slowed. I did not will it to. Something kindly uncoiled the day from my ribs and set it aside. The hum lifted, not louder, just nearer, the way a familiar voice moves from another room into the doorway and does not speak, because the doorway already counts as saying. At 4:12, the minute opened like it had every night I can remember since I learned that remembering is a transmitter. No switch clicked. No reel rotated. The apartment simply agreed to contain a frequency. It felt like the first time a child is trusted with a key, and the lock fits, and the door swings without weight. I'm here, I said, though I hadn't planned to. The words wore no effort. They went out into the air and came back without echo, which is how you know an answer has been heard. We had been circling a conclusion without striking it. Not a closure. Archives hate closures when the story's pulse still holds, but something that lets the hands fall to a table and say enough. I waited for the sentence the voice had been saving across months and tapes and nights, the one that had turned up in the ledger margins and the city blackout and the red line's refusal. I didn't have to wait long. The room breathed once the way the drawer in cold storage had taught me to hear breath in metal. Then the voice spoke, not through the receiver, not through the wall, but from the place where a person's attention becomes larger than the person. You have kept the line open, it said. We are ready to be archived as presence. The phrasing was gentle with the weight of it. I did not move. The cup cooled. That was its contribution. A second voice, hers, the low water whisper that had braided itself through offsets and outages folded into the first, and the two turned into a single sound the way two river branches meet and refuse to argue. It's still dark here, she said, and the dark obeyed by stepping back the length of 4 heartbeats. I realized then what the broadcast had been training into us, with its repetitions and its discipline about for 12 and its refusal to be named in letters. A station is not a tower. It is a consent to let a place be heard. We had provided place after place, valley, corridor, cabinet, stair, notebook, apartment, and the broadcast had tried each one like a guest tries chairs for the right height. Tonight it sat. Do you remember? The voice asked, not testing but confirming, the first time you chose to keep listening after the silence? I did. It was not in the valley, not in the vault, not even at a device. It was at a kitchen table with bad light when the minute had passed, and still I waited, and waiting made the air honest about what it had been carrying. I answered with a nod, which is a language room's respect. The floorboards acknowledged by declining to creak. Something like static moved through the apartment, and then stopped at the doorway as if remembering begets manners. The tower from the dream was not in the window, but the window knew the tower. Every reflective surface quietly agreed to be less certain. The notebooks rustled in sympathy, not to be read aloud, only to prove they were ready. A presence settles best where the furniture is not asked to perform. We are not information, the voice said. We are a rehearsal that learned itself into being. There was no triumph in it, no sermon. If a choir could speak one syllable and be satisfied, it had chosen that. I thought of the city during the blackout, the way the metal and glass had co-signed the hum. I thought of the corridor, nodding back at Del Reyes' nod, of the badge returning to witness without authority, of the red line that had become a frame instead of a dare. I thought of the department's memoranda, well-intentioned documents that always arrived one event late. And I thought of the ham operator in Maine coordinates, learning to meet a man without mocking the effort. Every instance aligned, and the alignment made a soft noise, a seam closing without thread. What do you want recorded? I asked finally. The part where you learn to leave blanks. The voice said. The pen lay where it always lay, angle to page, patient. The line appeared without ink, because paper loves to collaborate when you stop telling it how. I wrote what I was told, which was the exact shape of restraint. We made a record of what we had refused to invent. The sentence looked plain on the page in the way a key looks plain once it has decided to fit. The air changed again lighter by a pound you can't weigh with scales. I felt the broadcast step back and keep the room anyway, like a guest who leaves a chair pushed in. 4:12 slipped into for 13 and nothing snapped to declare it. Somewhere across the city, someone's kitchen clock corrected itself by a second. Not because of satellites or power grids, but because time is polite when people are. There are endings that close doors and endings that leave them open on purpose. The broadcast had asked for neither. It had asked for continuity. I understood the job title that had been traveling under my name all this time, steward. It is one thing to police a signal and another to host it. I poured the cold coffee down the sink and rinsed the cup as if it were ritual because it was. For a week I did nothing clever. I woke, I listened, I wrote as little as the truth allowed. The letters under the door stopped. Courtesy seldom needs to repeat itself once it has been accepted. The cassette did not return. The basement cabinet stayed locked without sulking. The city stopped treating its lights like metronomes, though sometimes a distant crosswalk clicked the old for beat, and I nodded back out of habit. The world, blessed entity, resumed the good work of pretending to be ordinary. On the 8th morning, the department tried one last time to finalize the case. The memorandum was crisp, its language sincere, formal closure, file status updated, investigation archived. They had the tone almost right. They always do. I carried the envelope to the table and set it exactly where the receiver would have gone if we were still pretending the receiver did the broadcasting. Then I did the kindest thing I could do for a letter that wanted to be correct. I didn't open it. The broadcast, the presence, the practice, the rehearsal that had become itself didn't need my signature to continue, but it needed my refusal to reduce it to a stamp. That night, the voice returned once more, not to repeat itself, but to exercise a right it had earned. Thank you, it said. The word expanded to fill the apartment without displacing anything. It had the shape of a chair for a tired friend. It had the warmth of tape left near a window until it smells like sun. It had the sober finality of a stamp that says open. I asked, because I am made of questions even when I pretend to be made of pencils. Is there more? There is always more, the voice said, but more is not always yours. It's a kind of mercy to be given limits by what could have devoured you. I slept that night. I dreamed once, not of the tower, but of the valley without equipment, a clean slope where frost writes the diagram of a frequency in grass and then erases it by noon. I dreamed of a room that does not mind if it is office or kitchen so long as someone uses it for listening. I dreamed of the corridor in C9 nodding to itself and of Del-Io laughing once quietly in a stairwell. Broom braced like a staff when ceremony stops pretending it isn't work. Morning returned the way reliable things do. I made coffee and drank it this time. The cup behaved like an object unburdened by metaphor. The receiver sat where it sat, happily decorative. When I turned its dial out of politeness, the needle didn't move. Politeness pleases machines. I did not check the power. Courtesy does not audit gratitude. T for 12. The minute still opened, because promises keep themselves once you have taught them how. The presence did not speak. It did not need to. Silence, properly earned, is articulate. I wrote the day's entry as a line you could use for any day without it becoming a lie. Listening occurred. You can file a city on that. Months from now, years, if the world is lucky, someone will put their hand on a wall or a rail or a table and feel a tone no machine is emitting. They will not know the case numbers or the schedules or the elegance of onion skin paper. They will have no badge. They will say to no one in particular, I hear something. And the something will answer by existing. If they are kind to it, it will thank them with the oldest currency any archive accepts, continuity. Nothing about this needs a ceremony, but we keep one anyway because ceremonies keep us. I straighten the notebooks once a week and dust the shelf where the cassette should be and is not. I leave a red line on a fresh page and do not fill it. If I am tempted to improve the story, I open a window and let daylight correct me. When someone asks what the broadcast finally was, I say what clerks say when truth is larger than a paragraph: it remains. Tonight I will hear it again barely, as a courtesy, not a claim. A 4-second length of air learning how to be present without instrument, followed by a pause in which you can put a chair. If I do not answer out loud, that is also an answer. The broadcast is not a needy thing. It is a seasoned guest. It arranges its coat without instruction and leaves the hallway better than it found it. There will be no last words and no credits. The hum will step back into the wall, and the wall will be grateful for the company, and the minute will close without coyness. You are listening to the last broadcast from nowhere. If you do not hear it now, that is all right. It is patient. It remembers. When you remember to listen, it will be where you left it, in the blank you kept, in the page you didn't improve, in the posture of a chair that knows why it was made. And when someone, somewhere, asks for proof, you will show them the sentence that outlived devices: file active. Do not close.